Hello there, welcome to this tutorial on how to build this bullet and casing. Okay, commonly referred to as a round. The bullet is only the part that actually comes out of the gun. The case is this part here. So the whole thing is known as a round. And what we're going to do over one or two, maybe even three tutorials is get from this stage here, from an initial diagram of the bullet to this just about finished render. Okay, so let's just take a look at what we've got. We've got the bullet here, the casing, and we've got the, I'm not sure what this is called, some sort of clip that clips the rounds together. Okay, so let's just close this, and this is the reference that we'll be using. This is just a diagram taken from Google Images. It's much better to use a diagram like this rather than a photograph because there'll be no distortion in this diagram. Photographs generally have some sort of lens distortion and the top might look tilted away. Or okay, so what I'll do is I'll just close that. This again is a beginner's tutorial, so I'm going to go quite slowly here and take you through how to load up reference images, how to assign reference images to a plane. What we'll do then is create a profile using the line tool, and then we'll assign some simple materials to the round. Right, well, we'll be working mainly in this front viewport here, so I'm just going to click here and Alt W to maximize that viewport, and we'll go to our create panel here and over to plane, and I'll just drag out a plane. Okay, now it's wireframe at the minute. I'm going to hit F3 just to turn it to shaded view. Okay, next thing we want to do is assign our reference image to this plane. So to do that we need to bring up the material editor. You can hit M on your keyboard or go up to the checkered ball up here. Now if your material editor doesn't look like this, it may look like this. This is the, not new, but I suppose it's a couple of years old now, the Slate material editor, which I really don't like to use, so I'm going to stick to this compact material editor here, which I much prefer. Okay, so what we've got are 6 spheres here, which each contain a material that we can assign to the object in the scene. So I'm just going to go to the first one here, and it's a standard material. There are many more types of materials. I'm going to give it a name, and I'll just call it round reference. Okay, so what we need to do is get the image onto this so that we can then apply it to our plane here that we're going to use for reference to draw around. Okay, so we'll look over here in the basic parameters here, and we've got diffuse. Diffuse is just simply another name for color. So we know that if I put this material onto this object just by clicking and dragging, it has now changed color. We can change the diffuse color here just by clicking and giving it some whatever color we want and hit OK. But what we want to do is apply an image to this. So we've got this little button here. It says none at the minute because there's nothing in it. What this is an area that lets us apply many things into this slot, but what we want is a bitmap. So I'm just going to click OK, select bitmap, click OK. This brings us to your file selection dialog, so I'll just scroll down and find a reference image on the desktop. Okay, now we can't see this image on this yet. You know the material has been applied to this object because we've got this object selected and there are small white filled in rectangles at each corner of the material. If I deselect this object just by clicking, the triangles become semi-filled in. This means that this material is used in the scene, but it's not on the object that we have selected. So if I click that, you can see it fills back in. So that's a handy way of knowing what materials are in your scene and what material is applied to each object. Okay, so we've got this image loaded into the diffuse color slot. I'm going to use this little button here, show shaded material in viewport. Just going to click it, and we have a very fat wide bullet. Now, I intentionally made this plane a little bit wider than normal to show you a method of getting the image at with the correct aspect ratio, so that we don't draw our bullet or our casing wide like that. Okay, we could just come in here and go, yeah, this looks about right. We can adjust the length and the width here, but we can never be 100% sure that that is accurate. We can, however, if we go to our modify list here and just scroll down and go to UVW map, nothing will change because the UV coordinates that we've assigned here, which tell the image where to be placed on the object, are just around the object like this. Okay, around the perimeter. Nothing has really changed there. What I'm going to do is scroll down here and go to bitmap fit and click it, select our image, and when I click open, you should see a little bit of change in perspective or in aspect ratio of the image here. In actual fact, I got that just about spot on, but it did change slightly. What we can do now is go to our plane and just make it about this size. We can go into the UVW map gizmo here and just position that a little bit better. Okay, and I think that's ready to go now. So I'll just close my material editor here, and what I'll do now is just get this to the center of the viewport. Easy way to do this is you can come down to the bottom here and just right click these spinners, or I'll just undo that. You can right click the select and move tool, and that will bring us up our move transform type in, and we can do the same here. I tend to just leave this open sometimes when I'm working with splines because I want to type in some values here directly. So that's us ready to go now. In actual fact, there's one last thing I want to do. If we go to our create tool here, our create panel, and over to shapes, and we start drawing lines, sometimes they're very hard to see. It's not the case here, but generally what I want to do is move that just away from into the screen, if you want to call it that, and the Y axis here. So I'm just going to pull it back slightly like that and go to front view, and I'll turn the grid off. Okay, so I'll just delete this line here. Alright, so what we want to do here is get our line tool, and I'm going to show you a way that I see some of my students using the line tool sometimes, which is the worst possible way you can use it. We have this curve here. What I frequently see are students doing this to create a curve. So they're trying to create a curve by creating all these points like this. There are tools in the software which are meant to build smooth curves really easily, and I'm going to just show you them on this spline here. So I'll just go to the modify panel and into Vertex. Now, if we wanted to build a smooth curve here, we could sit here all bloody night and move these until we get the proper curve. We could even come in and switch them away from this angular type of point called a corner to smooth. And that's a bug that annoys me sometimes. It won't select the right quad menu. So I'm just going to change these to smooth. Okay, and that looks like a reasonable curve. But what happens if somebody asks you to build another bullet and you want to use the profile that you've made before? Well, you might have to start grabbing all these vertices and pulling them up into a different shape, and complete pain in the arse. So You do not ever build curves by using a whole load of points like that. Let's just delete this, and I'll delete this one here. I'll show you the proper way to build a curve now. In fact, I'm going to try and build this just with one line. So I'm going to go up to the center, the top of the bullet, and I'm just going to click. I'm going to click here, 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 and I've just right clicked and I've cancelled this creation mode. I actually did this on purpose because I see this frequently. A lot of students start to create a line, they're drawing around some sort of profile or diagram or whatever, and suddenly they right click and cancel the line creation mode. Then they come in and they've cancelled the creation of the initial line, but they're still in the creation mode. So if they start clicking again, they end up with 2 lines. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that second one. I just want to show you quickly how we can add to this line so that it's the same line. It's not 2 different lines, 2 different objects. So I'm just going to go into the modify panel and I'll go create line, automatic welding, and you'll see when I hover the mouse over it, it changes to that little different pointer. What I'm going to do is just hover over it and click, and we know now that we're attached to the original line. We're not creating 2 lines. So I'm just going to zoom in using the mouse wheel here and come down to the bottom, click, 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 and over to the center. Now I'm just going to make sure to come out of this mode now. So basically what we've got now is a really rough profile, which we're going to fix. Okay, so the proper way to get the curve for the top, for the bullet here, we'll go into Vertex Subobject mode, and I'm just going to select these 2 vertices just by dragging around them, and I'm going to right click and go Bezier corner. Okay, so this is a much better way. We can grab these handles and move them around to create a curve. So I'm going to pull this one to about here, and I'll pull this one to about there. Okay, so if in the future we want a different bullet, we could pull this down and make a bullet with more of a snub nose. I seem to have moved this vertex as well. Let's just pull it back up to here. So we now have a completely different looking bullet. Much easier than 20 million vertices and trying to make a curve out of them. So what we're going to do is just pull this handle in, and I was locked to this axis here. You can see when you hover over these different axes, they highlight. If I hover over this one and click and then try and move the handle, it is locked to this y-axis here. Okay, I can't move it left and right. I'm trying, but it won't move. It will only move up and down. If I go to the x-axis and click, same thing, only it will only move in this x-axis. It won't move up and down at all. However, if I go in between these 2 and click on the square, so that the square gets highlighted, just left click on it, I can then drag this whatever way I like. Okay, so if you find that you can't move these handles, you more than likely you have locked it to one of the 2 or 3 axes. Okay, so let's just pull this handle out. This image is not the highest quality of image, but for our purposes now it'll serve okay. So there's the curve for our round coming down. I'm going to make sure that this one here, where the line enters this one, it's straight down. I'll come down here and I'll take a look at these vertices here, and I'm just going to make this straight. You can feel it, you might be able to pick it up in the viewport there. You can feel it snap to a straight line. We then have the start of the casing here. I'm just going to pull this in, making sure that these lines are straight. I'm going to show you a way we can make sure they're exactly straight shortly. So just come down here, and we'll pull this one to about here, this one to here, this one to here. That looks okay. If you want to make sure these lines are 100% straight, what we can do is just select two vertices that are in a row. In fact, we might want to just get these four. Actually, no, because this end of the casing here is slightly closer to the center than this outer bit, so I'm not going to pick those two. I'm just going to pick these two here. I'm going to go to my scale tool, and I'm going to pick this option for the selection. Okay, this tells the scale tool to scale towards the center of the selection. So to show you what that means, because it might not be very apparent there, I'm just going to scale these in. They will come into the center point between two of them. Let's just undo with Control Z. So I'm just going to make sure these vertexes are perfectly straight up just by clicking on them and just dragging through to the left. You can see my mouse pointer is wrapping to the other side of the screen there, so we know that's fairly good there. I'll do the same here just a few times, and here, although those look quite good. I'm just going to drag them in, and let's see, and these two here. Okay, you can actually hold down Shift as you draw lines to get perfect verticals and horizontal lines, but I usually forget to do it and end up doing this. Okay, let's just take a look at the tip of the bullet here for a second. You can see it looks like we've got another vertex here, but in actual fact we haven't. This line is, the interpolation of this line is quite low, and what that means is it has made the curve, it's given the curve this kind of segmented look here. So what I'm going to do is go into interpolation here. I'm just going to hit adaptive, and you can see we instantly get a much smoother curve. Okay, so we're nearly done with the reference image. So what I'm going to do is just hide it. There's several ways you can do this. You can select the image and go right click on it and go hide selection. Just undo that. Or you can have your profile selected here and hit Alt Q, and what that does is it isolates the object from everything else in your scene. Everything else is still there, it just means it's hidden, and you can see that you've got something isolated by this little toggle here. Okay, so we can actually use that as well to isolate. So I've got my profile selected here, isolate. Okay, so what we're going to do now is switch to a different view using P. I'm going to go perspective, and I'm going to hold down Alt and just move around this. I'm going to switch my grid back on as well, just with the G shortcut. So here is half of a round. Now the reason you only have to build half is because we're going to use a modifier in this called lathe. And for any of you who know what a lathe is, it basically, I'm not a mechanically minded person, but it cuts lumps of metal which are spun round. Okay, so we'll do that now. Just go to the modifier list and scroll down to lathe. Okay, and that looks nothing like a bullet or a casing or a round. So how do we fix it from here? Quick way, we can go to here and hit the min button, see what that looks like. That looks almost perfect. I'll just show you what these do. This moves the center of rotation of the lathe towards the center of the line, and this moves it further on. Interesting, but not what we want. You can also go into our lathe modifier here and down to axes. I'm on scale at the minute. I want to switch that back to move, and we can drag this out, potentially creating a different caliber of bullet. The only problem with doing like that is that you can end up with a hole in the top. So I'm just going to hit, was it minimum? Yeah. I'm going to hit weld core so that it welds these points at the top and this point at the bottom here. So I'll just go weld core. So there's the basic model. We can make it much higher resolution by using this control here for segments. This is the number of segments around that the lathe creates, and you'll see if I drag them up we can create loads and loads of segments, or we can pull it right down to 3 and we've basically got a triangular bullet. Okay, so let's put that back to something like, say, 32. So there is our bullet. What I'm also going to do is move the pivot point for this bullet. That's where this object is located. I'm going to move it to the center of the bullet just by going to the hierarchy panel here. I'm going to go Effect Pivot Only, and you can see it shows us where our pivot is, and I'm just going to go Center to Object, and then I'll turn this back off. So that's a little bit neater now. Okay, so where do we go from here? I don't know if any of you have seen purple bullets before, but I certainly don't want this one being purple. So what do we do now? Well, if we go back to our image, view image file, to this one, we have a copper coated bullet. We have a brass casing. This is also a different material. We're not going to create that in this tutorial, but we basically need 2 materials. In actual fact, if we look at our original reference rather than the render, you will see that we actually need 3 because we've got a different tip right up here. So we're going to need a brass material, a coppery material, and something that looks like lead. Okay, so let's just bring open our material editor again, and I'm going to create 3 materials here. I'm going to rename 3 materials. Let's call this one lead, this one copper, and this one brass. Now I'm only going to give in this tutorial I'm only going to give these basic colors. So I'm just going to click the color swatch and go to a brassy color. Let's go to the copper one, and we'll choose something that looks a little bit copperish. It's almost gold, and a little bit deeper, something like that. Okay, and this one will be lead. I'll just make this a little bit darker and maybe just a touch of blue into it. Okay, so let's hit OK. We now have 3 materials: lead, copper, and I thought I had named that, but obviously I haven't. Brass. So let's put the lead on the tip, and everything changes. Okay, let's try the copper, and now everything's copper, and now everything's brass. So how do we get 3 different materials applied to one object when every time we apply one, you can see we have the brass on at the minute? If we go to this one, remember what I said about the corners and the triangles? There are no corners at all on these 2 materials, so they're not used in the scene. When I drag the copper material to the round, it's now in the scene, as you can see by the filled in triangles. The brass material is no longer in the scene because it's been replaced on the round by the copper, and if we do the same here, if I drag the lead to it, the copper is no longer in the scene, but the lead is. So we have a problem on how to create three materials onto one object? Well, there's quite a neat solution to this. What we're going to use is what's called a multi-subobject material. So if I go up to another material here and select it, I'm going to hit the standard button here. Now you'll notice these options are slightly different than what we got when we hit the diffuse. That's because we're now choosing material rather than a component of a material, which is what you would put in here. So I'm going to go down to multi-subobject and I'm going to click OK. Now it doesn't really matter what we choose here. I'm just going to choose discard old material. So what we've got now is a multi-subobject material here. Notice when we click on these are standard materials. This is a multi-subobject material. And what this lets us do is put these materials into places here, into holders here. And the multi-subobject can take, I don't actually know how many it can take. I've never ran out, put it like that. So, but what we need are three materials. So these will be stored in these slots here. So let's just hit set number and knock this down to 3. Okay. Now, how do we get them from there to here? Very simple. We just click and drag. So our lead, I'm going to choose instance here so that we can work on these materials here and they will automatically be updated in the multi-subobject, which will then be applied to our round. I'm going to choose instance. If I choose copy, they wouldn't automatically update. So let's choose instance. Then let's take our copper and put it into slot 2. Instance. Take our brass and put it into slot 3. And instance. And I'll name this round 1.62. I'm going to put in 7.62 millimeters there just because it sounds really cool. Reminds me of Vietnam. Okay, so you can see now in our multi-subobject material here we have little patches showing you the various materials, 1, 2, 3 of them here. This material is not in our scene. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just drag it to our round and drop it, and we get pure brown again. So what we need to do is find some way of telling this material to be applied just in the correct places. Okay, so the brass material here, the copper material here, and the lead material here. We haven't actually modeled a percussion cap. We might get to that at the back, which we could probably get away with just putting the lead material on it. But if not, we can just simply create another material in our sub-object here. Okay, so let's just go select this and go to our modify panel. Okay, if we look over in our multi-sub-object here, we have various controls here. We've got sub-material, name, ID. The ID is the important thing. We can change IDs here. I generally just leave them at 1, 2, and 3. So each material has its own ID. 1, 2, and 3. So how do we get those IDs onto this object? Well, what we'll do is we'll go down to our line object. You can see when I select that, your line may change to look like this. It may look like this, solid. This little button here, show end result, will let you see your line with the lathe on it, even when you're working at sub-objects of the line. Okay, so that's quite a handy little button there. I'm going to leave it off for now. Okay, so let's just see what material. So this is going to be brass from here right up to this point, this point here. In actual fact, this point here. So this little line here will also be brass. Okay, so and brass is here. It's in the multi-sub object. Its ID is 3. So what we need to do is make a material ID here of 3. And we can do that just by scrolling, we'll go to segment mode and scroll down. And we've got surface properties rollout here. So we can go set ID. So I'm going to select all the segments here that I want to apply the brass material to. So it's right up to there. And those need to be number 3. So I'll go 1, 2, 3. Okay. Here needs to be copper. So I'm going to select that and change that to copper's ID, which is 2. So let's just click 2. And we have a slight problem here because we have no way of selecting just this little bit here because we have no vertex here to separate this into 2 segments. So what I'm going to do is just scroll up the top here, go to refine and put one about there. That's a rough guess. So we can now select this bit separately from here. So this one, I can't remember whether I actually set it or not. Yes, I did, 2. And this one gets material ID 1. So there's our material ID set up. Let's just come out of segment mode here and go back to our lathe. And it didn't work. Okay, so we have one last thing to do. We just need to turn on use shape IDs. And that worked well. Okay, so I made a slight mistake there. I couldn't work out why I was getting this little strip around the top here, so I switched off the recording, worked out why, and then re-recorded it and forgot to enable audio. So this is my second attempt at doing this bit now. So feeling a little bit of a dick, but okay. Right, so where we had got to here, I'll just hide our reference again here. We had applied this multi-subobject material here, but it wasn't applying to the correct parts of the model. Okay, and the reason for that was that we had this little switch called adaptive on here. Now you learn something new every day when you use 3D software. So this is what I've learned today. So let's turn off adaptive, and now we have our lead ID1 applied to here, and we have our copper to the rest of the bullet, and we have our brass material on the casing here. Okay, so a couple of last things I want to do. I want to model the percussion cap down here. In fact, I already have that done. Okay, from the last one. Let's do one last thing. I want to create a model which is slightly higher res than this one, because I don't really like, if I switch to the front viewport here, I don't really like these really sharp angles here. They're not the way a bullet would be. There'd be little scratches and dents all over it, and these would possibly have been worn down. Okay, and they would never have been manufactured at that sort of angle. So what I'm going to do is add an edit spline modifier in below the lathe, if I can find it. There it is. Okay, if you watched my last tutorial on text, you'll know that I like to add these modifiers in rather than make the change in the line object itself, because it's so easy just to turn it off and turn it on when you don't need it. So what I'm going to do is just go to vertex mode, making sure I'm in the edit spline modifier, not vertex mode in the line. So let's just open the plus here and go to vertex. I'm going to select all these vertexes here, vertices, I don't know what the correct terminology is. Holding down control lets me select multiple ones. This one, and this one. I don't actually want this one, so what I'm going to do is hold down Alt and just drag around it. So we've got all the vertices for the case selected apart from this one here. Okay, let's just zoom in here. What I'm going to do is go fillet, and I'm just going to click and drag and round these off the tiniest little bit. Now you may think, what's the point in that? Well, when you come to render it, you'll see nice highlights and it'll look a lot sweeter than if we hadn't have done this. Plus we can always go boom, and it's off. Okay, so let's just go back up to our lathe object now. Now remember, the edit spline is off here, so you can't see those changes. I'll just go to perspective mode and zoom in here, and let's turn on our edit spline now, and we have these nice soft edges here, but we still have the hard edge here. We still have hard edge. Well, it's not really an edge, it's just a difference in material here. Okay, and that is our round finished. Okay, what we're going to do in the next tutorial, I'll just bring up our render that I did this about a year ago. We'll create these more realistic materials. We will have a go at creating the clip here. I'll show you a few techniques for making sure that when we sort of come to build like an ammo belt, that everything attaches together nicely, everything fits. Okay, using what are called references and instances. Okay, we'll have a go at building a nice environment for our metal to reflect. You'll notice that these rounds up in the top here are slightly out of focus, and I think maybe the ones down here are very slightly out of focus as well. What that is it's simulated depth of field from a camera, and I've done that using what's called a Z depth pass and then brought it into Photoshop, and we'll do that as well. That could actually be set up to render like that, but to actually render depth of field inside 3ds Max can increase your render times easily tenfold. So I'm going to leave that, and we'll do it the quick way, which is quite good. So there is our finished round, and that's it for now. I just want to say, if you enjoyed doing this tutorial, if you watched it right to the end, leave a comment below and just tell me what you thought of it, whether you liked it, whether you didn't. Okay, and if there's anything you would really like to see, I'm only doing basic tutorials at the minute because I want to get used to making these tutorials before I go on to anything more advanced. But if there's anything like you'd like me to cover, just leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. Bye.